All right, welcome everyone. We are here for another episode of Touch Lab Share. We are very excited to be joined by the Volley team, both Josh and Aaron. So we're going to start off with introductions. If Aaron, you want to go first and kind of give us a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll switch over to Josh before we dive into some of the questions that we have prepared for today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, really happy to be here. Thanks for having us. My very long-winded title is Vice President of Engineering for Media, Infrastructure, and Mobile over at Volley. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything. Most of my career was actually in mobile. Huge fan of Kotlin from even prior jobs that I've worked with Josh here as well. And we've just kind of carried it through to our current projects here at Volley. So yeah, really happy to be here.
And I'm Josh. I come from a non-traditional tech background, which I always like to rep. Went to a boot camp, and then I've been doing Android for about 5 years now, and then iOS for 1 year, and I've been with Volley for that year.
Awesome. For the folks that may have not have heard of Volley, we would kind of like to hear it straight from the folks that are working on the products. How would you describe the company, its products, and what are they working to accomplish? Like what's kind of the vision and mission here?
So Volley kind of has grown up with the most success kind of around the voice market, and that's definitely what we've sort of come to specialize in. We're fond of saying internally that like we sort of want to target anything with a microphone. So Alexa is definitely our, Alexa and Google Assistant are our big sort of targets. And then as things sort of start to show a lot of promise and grow an audience, we start looking at like, well, how can we bring mobile into the picture? So, like one of our top skills in the voice arena is Song Quiz. And like I think that's kind of been our behemoth sort of for most of the company's life. And eventually we're like, okay, people want to play this on mobile. Let's make Song Quiz mobile. Volley FM, which is sort of our sort of micro podcast, little 5-minute daily clips, with our own sort of set of hosts and content creators. That started to grow and get, very successful. And so we said, okay, people are going to want to be able to take this with them, kind of seamlessly transition to maybe listening in the kitchen to listening in the car. So that's kind of where mobile came in for that. And so, yeah, just kind of anything with a microphone, voice, that's sort of what we do.
Thank you for that. And kind of going into, what a typical day looks like for both of you. Can you just kind of just describe what some of the roles and responsibilities that you're currently working on?
I'm the lead mobile engineer for Android and iOS for the Volley FM app. So my day is just writing code, talking with the product, and planning the features and coordinating dependencies and whatnot. And so I'm the engineer for both the Android and the iOS app. So I jump into both code bases, and through KMM, there's a lot of shared code, which makes my life easier. And so, yeah, typical day, I might be working on, like, let's say I'm working on a new feature. I'll pick one of the platform to write it in first, like whether it's iOS or Android, work on the shared code, and then jump on the other platform to finish it out.
Yeah, and I unfortunately get to write very little mobile code these days, as Volley has kind of grown and scaled, pretty quickly in the past year. So it was really cool that I was able to land Josh and live vicariously through him. But yeah, my day to day like is managing kind of all of the voice product engineering that happens in the media group. And so that is Volley FM, that's bedtime stories, things like that, as well as kind of overseeing the direction of our infrastructure group. And so like we have our own internal engine for building multi-platform voice skills. Unfortunately, that side is TypeScript. And it was a Node company that I came into. And so we kind of lean hard into that. And it's been really good. And then, yeah, just kind of checking in with Josh every now and then and seeing what he needs.
I'm glad we have both perspectives here, right? We have the kind of management side, and then we have the folks that are actually in KMM day in and day out. My question to Josh has to be, you describe yourself as an Android and iOS engineer, and we know that a big part of the draw to coming over to Volley was the ability to work on KMM. What's been the experience like so far, being able to deliver on both platforms? What do you like about the experience? Just kind of share with us, because I think that title, to me, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, that's really interesting, right? Android and iOS. What are your thoughts there?
So yeah, I mean, like the draw of KMM, of course, was the shared code base, being able to and to not have to write everything twice. And when I first started at Volley, like my first task was refactoring the iOS code base because it was originally written as a hackathon project. After doing that, and then like jumping into the Android code base, like they were different architectures. It was just the context switching was huge and like very costly. I would have to like, I didn't want to jump in and out of the code bases. I was like, wait, I want to focus on this one first because it's going to take me like an afternoon to ramp up on the other one. With KMM and the shared code base, like the architectures are aligned. Like it's much easier to reason about everything. It's much easier to think about like how to add new features. And so jumping in and out is much easier. Like I'm very comfortable jumping, like starting my day on Android, going to iOS, like switching back and forth. Like so the cost of context shifting is greatly reduced.
I kind of wonder if Kevin, Sam, Russell, like, did you share those experiences? Do they sound familiar?
Yeah, certainly. As I was saying, I'm curious actually if you still find yourself kind of favoring one or the other. Like I definitely still feel more at home on the Android side than the iOS side, despite having done both for a while now.
For sure. Like definitely because Android's what I know. Android's my home. So I definitely feel more comfortable on the Android side, and it's like writing the shared code in Kotlin is great. I love Kotlin. But then also each has its own appeals too. Like there are UI things that are much easier to do on iOS than Android. But if you're talking about like comfort level, yeah, I would say that I feel more comfortable on Android.
Weird in that regard. Not that I feel more comfortable with iOS. I've just been so far out from being an Android-only dev for so many years. I'm not sure which platform more actual binary gets shipped on out of my day. But I will say merging a large Xcode project from a release branch into, I did that yesterday. I wasn't excited about it.
Yeah, is that what you did yesterday? Yeah.
I had a lot of things I needed to get done yesterday. Yesterday was about a solid 12-hour day. Many of those hours were involved in that one particular thing. But obviously it's not Kotlin related. But there are certain things like I worry significantly less about the device variation for object screen stuff. So that's what you're doing. But I don't really think of the architectures as much different because underneath they're not when we're working with our shared code. So there you go.
I'm not an Android engineer, but I agree with Josh. Android is still my home because of TouchLab and all the folks that work on it. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the use case of KMM at Volley. Where in the portfolio, in the suite of products, right, does this KMM sit, and what's kind of the use case for KMM on that particular part of the suite?
Yeah, so right now we're using KMM in the Volley FM mobile app. It is the first app we're using KMM in, and it was the test run to see if it, to see how successful it would be. So far, it's been great. We've loved it, and the goal is to be able to share code in future mobile apps as well. Some of my favorite things about working in KMM is also just trying to build these reusable components, and like especially if we have less engineers, like the more we could take off their plates, the better. And so if we have module that works for iOS and Android, great. And so like at Volley right now, we're working on we've got a media player for Android and iOS, and the eventual goal, like far future, is to release it open source. But the ability to be able to drop like a media player into a different app on Android or iOS, I think would be a huge gain for us.
And kind of describe the technical makeup of the KMM implementation. What's being utilized, what's being shared.
Right. So we're using KTOR for the networking. We're using a open source library that Aaron built for caching for the data layer persistence. And then we are also sharing view models, which is I think a huge benefit, especially of having a small team working working on both platforms, is that we're able to share all this code. Like the one of the big draws of KMM, like and shared code, was the fact that like we could also share view models. So that's a lot of potential for code sharing. So that's how we're using it.
View models are a neat one because like I've definitely seen some kind of back and forth in the community on like what layer you want to stop at. Like sometimes you want things to behave a little bit differently per platform, or you want to be able to like mean two platform specific things more easily. But when you kind of get it all shared, it's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have had conversations with some pretty diehard iOS folks, that I know in my network and on Twitter. And I think the one thing that they like that is kind of unassailable that they can't come back against is just like, yeah, man, data and networking, like maybe work into view models and like the architecture stuff later. But everybody that you pitch just like, yeah, unified networking and caching to, like everybody has scars from from that they're just like, yeah, I would love to just be able to cut down that work, have one really well-tested code base, and not have like Android getting 4 stars on the Play Store and iOS getting 3 stars because like of tech debt or whatever. So yeah, it definitely resonates.
Is the networking shared throughout the app, or are you sharing a particular module like the video player that you mentioned?
Networking is shared throughout the app. So we're using Ktor for all our API calls.
It's like sort of JetBrains earmuffs. How do you feel about Ktor in the sense that like it's an interesting conversation that comes up repeatedly. Like, Ktor kind of does a lot of platforms, and it kind of tries to do the same thing across a lot of platforms. But especially on, let's say, the iOS side, it's still, as far as I know, you like launch it from the main thread, even though it clearly doesn't do its work in the main thread. But there's certain restrictions there. We find it kind of difficult to test. And some folks essentially implement like a mobile native only network layer, which is something we kind of internally discussed on and off. We don't really want to compete with Ktor.
So yeah, my thoughts on Ktor is I've heard about drawbacks like serialization happens on the main thread, and we weighed the pros and cons and decided that the pros outweighed the cons there, like because our payloads aren't that big, like we're not taking that big of a hit with the serialization stuff. And then also, Aaron and I were talking about this the other day, but just thinking about this, like Ktor was the foundational part of the app because like the first shared component was the networking. So seeing that worked was also just psychologically like really cool because it's like this works. There's potential here. Let's keep going. And yeah, just it was the first building block, and we don't really have any complaints. It's been great so far.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of really cool synergy just that Ktor and the Kotlin X serialization stuff sort of like, comes as a pair almost. And just like, it's almost like the unsung hero of this equation is that like they kind of solved, not having to have this layer of, like JSON on one side and, iPotable or whatever on the other side. It's just like, yeah, like throw in some annotations. We're big fans of QuickType for actually converting. Like we actually do a lot of our schemas in TypeScript and then run it through QuickType. I actually contributed the Kotlin X serialization support for the converter, and it's beautiful, right? And so then just having a network layer that kind of hooks directly into those types natively, like is like almost a bonus.
Looking back, right, I know the experience has been pretty positive and it's working, and the team enjoys working with the technology. A couple of things, right? Looking back, what were some of the trickier things that you had to solve for your particular organization that you think are applicable to other teams? Any stuff like that we can talk about?
So I will say this, like it has been a very positive experience, but we also knew what we were getting into because we started using it before Kotlin 1.4, which was like, a milestone change. And so writing before that and after that, we had to change a whole bunch of stuff. The coroutines, multi-threading dependency didn't work on iOS for like a couple weeks too. Like, so just there were issues, but we knew what we were getting into, and that was something we took head on, and it's been very positive, and now it's a lot more stable. So I think people coming into it now, it'll be much easier. But also, as far as things we could have avoided, maybe like missteps, the one big thing that comes to mind was the caching library we're using. We originally were importing it as an artifact, and while these changes were happening, it was difficult to manage like transitive dependencies. So when things worked on Android, but they didn't work on iOS because serialization like hit 1.0 and we didn't notice that we didn't update it, it was hard to track down. So in hindsight, we shouldn't have tried to separate things out so soon and waited for things to be more stable and like just thrown everything into a single project. That's the big one.
I think we'll get to that part about the weighing the risk, pros and cons, right? But I think a common theme that we hear in a lot of the teams that we talk to for TouchLab Share is we knew what we were getting into, right? We evaluated in certain areas that we knew were going to be, alpha, other areas that were going to be beta, and we had a calculated approach to how we were going to manage some of that. So it's really cool to hear that theme coming up again in this particular occasion as well. Any areas that surprise you in terms of how well they worked?
It was the satisfaction of sort of making PRs in stereo, like doing an Android version followed by an iOS version, and then the reviewer was like, "Wait, didn't I just review this?"
Yeah, and Josh is also very good at attaching GIFs to his PRs of like, here is the feature in action, which like, if you ever want to make your boss really happy, just start doing that. And so I would get these PRs, and sometimes he would just PR both platforms at the same time, and there would just be two side-by-side GIFs of like scrolling the recycler view or whatever. So it was cool.
Yeah, like, and then the most satisfying part was also just figuring out how to architect it. When we were first evaluating the technology, like seeing what we could do with it, I remember just not knowing how to use reactive patterns from the shared module on the iOS side. I was like, wait, do I need to wrap this in something and use like implement combine, and like freaking out about that. And then I found this thing online from IntelliJ where they wrap flows like for this Kotlin conference app, and we're able to use them on the iOS side. Once we found that, it was like, oh, we're good to go. Like seeing how well that worked is like, oh, like now, like this is a totally viable thing we can do.
Do you find yourself like running into any issues with the threading model around that?
We have tried to avoid those issues as best we can by not changing threads when we don't need to. We are recently, as we're like adding more complexity, I have started to run into these issues, and now I'm learning more about the threading model, and it's a steep learning curve. It's like it's surprising at first.
What do you mean? It's just straightforward. Russell, why'd you bring it up?
Like, yeah, just seeing how everything. Well, okay, so for example, like if for some of this, I've been, writing like an interface or an expect actual class in the shared module. And then on the iOS side, I'll implement the interface and inject it into the shared module. And usually when that happens, like I'm only dealing with Kotlin data classes. So it's very trivial to freeze them and like pass them around. If I'm trying to write something in the shared module in Kotlin, there's more things going on with the multi-threading that like I have to think a lot harder and reason about like how things get frozen and like to what extent will that freezing stop.
I feel like I'm like the planet's only defender of the threading model in any way, shape, or form. But the interesting part is, and I just had this thought, it's been rolling around my head for a while. It is difficult. I think it's difficult because fundamentally on the JVM side, you don't have these rules and you're not used to them. And Kotlin, the language itself was designed JVM side. And then you have these rules over here on the iOS side, and I've been doing it for so long that I don't find them to be difficult necessarily to work with. But it's like a lot of people I've seen, especially even recently, they're like, I don't understand how this works. Like we didn't read the intro. Like you have to read the instructions. You can't not read the instructions. Otherwise it will absolutely not work. And looking forward down the road, I almost feel like this is a really good thing to learn if you want to understand concurrency, but then not have to use it. Do you know what I mean? Like if it was like this was a class in concurrency, you'd use Kotlin Native's like runtime model. So you'd really get intentional about thinking about your concurrency. They'd be like, all right, great, let's just take that away, and then you can like just use it however you want.
I'm down with that.
Yeah.
I think I kind of take for granted that, my background was in the game industry when I first started, before I kind of got in, we did an iOS game way back then, and that's how I got into iOS. But at first, yeah, it was C++, like building a game engine. I still think one of my favorite books out there is C++ Concurrency in Action, I think it's called, where it's like literally the book walks you through how you would write a lockless queue, I think, and just like how you do the transactional, kind of rollbacks and all that. And so, yeah, for me, it's just like, yeah, no, this is going to be okay. Like this is going to be really tricky, and this is going to be like C++. And I think, Josh kind of came into it and having done, the more JVM side and is, kind of digging into a lot of these things for the first time.
It is weird because it's like it was a noble effort, I think, on the Kotlin side, because it is putting rails around things you shouldn't do. Because usually it's like when you dig into, it's like, wow, this is getting frozen. And I don't understand why. It's like, well, because you are referencing something from a different thread that you really shouldn't be. But that all sounds good in theory. But then there's things that like you aren't intentionally referencing, or it's a immutable value that you're referencing from another thread, but that happens to capture the rest of your object graph. So, good intentions.
Yeah, I definitely get why they did it, and sort of also get why they eventually, first of all, mad props to JetBrains for looking at it and looking around the room, and they were just like, you know what? Come back to us in a couple of years. We're going to replace this. Looking forward to seeing how that goes.
I like.
Well, I mean, part of that I think was they were working on the multi-threaded coroutines and not just seeing other people running into issues, but running into issues themselves.
Yeah. There is a thing that will never see the light of day that I was like sucking up my life at the beginning, end of 2019, and beginning of 2020, which was an intelligent visual plug, was to help you code, but it was also part to help you learn the model. This is back when I was like, I definitely props to JetBrains for deciding to like say, hey, we're going to change this and hit pause for a couple of years in the runtime, effectively. But it was also like, I don't think that's going to help with adoption in the near term. I was trying to like convince people that it wasn't so bad, but I think we all collectively decided that this is the correct move. Now we're just all waiting. See how it goes. But yeah, it was actually pretty neat. Like what you can do with static analysis, it would just underline what it was like. You know what? You're trapping this and it frees this whole thing. Right?
I think lambdas was one of the tricky things that I remember us discussing the other day, of like pointing out, well, like this variable does get referenced in this lambda. You just enclosed it, and that was like having to start thinking in those terms is always tricky.
That's like 95% of the issues with the concurrency model. Because the lambda syntax makes it so easy to do certain things, but it's so easy to also capture state. And then like, it's like if you have a class and the class has a value that's like an integer, and then in a lambda, you're calling the database and you happen to be referencing that integer, you're also referencing the entire enclosing class and everything it touches, which might be your entire object graph, yada, yada, yada. So good times. So anyway, that intelligent plugin will never exist beyond the confines of my backup hard drive or whatever it is now.
Yeah, we can't even say RIP, it never came out, but it's there somewhere. I want to take a little bit of a step back, because I think we're getting into some of the more technical aspects of like implementation and kind of maintaining this. For the folks that are not there yet, right? What really stood out about KMM compared to other solutions? And what I mean by that is like, did you evaluate other solutions? If so, what ultimately led to the decision to move forward with KMM?
Definitely evaluated a lot of these solutions back when I was at Capital One, which is where Josh actually, kind of first joined my team through, Level Money and that acquisition and things like that. And, as part of one of these big organizations that's always looking for synergies and, consolidations, especially among their web developer group, who would often come over to us or somebody and be like, hey, like when can we, adopt React Native so all these web developers can get in on the mobile stuff. Hopefully that's past statute of limitations to talk about. I don't know. But yeah, so like I did the evaluation of React Native. We even like built a few things, like me and a few of the team members, and everybody kind of roundly agreed like this, like this isn't for us. I think it's hard to get mobile devs on board when both sides need to learn something new. At least like, you can get Android devs fully on board with Kotlin multi-platform because it's, as you said, it's home. So yeah, like React Native, like I think, both the JavaScript runtime, I think the fact that maybe in its earlier days it was very iOS centric and Android kind of like was a follow-on platform in many ways, like especially with the navigation stack. And then like philosophically, I'm not sold on shared UI. I think UI is a very special thing. Like being able to do full native, like platform specific UI means that you're always able to use the latest releases, tools, features, and that, you never have to worry about it. Like it just maybe a few pixels off, right? That kind of uncanny valley. I think Flutter just did the amazingly hard thing of fully replicating both visual platforms, like pixel by pixel, and good for them with the little goopy, animations and transitions. But I do still think, like when Apple goes and decides to change their entire design language, like Flutter is going to have a hard time, that, and I'm just personally not a huge Dart fan. So, and then I even went as far as to like evaluate Xamarin and all of that stuff, and it was fine. So, oh yeah, like I ran a game company for 2 years, and so there's a lot of like little projects sitting around at Volley of explorations in Unity for shared mobile stuff, which I still, really love, but it's not native.
Oh, I just want to echo Aaron's sentiments also about the fact that it didn't cover UI. Like that for me was a great, just like philosophically baked in separation of concerns. Cause I agree that it's usually with UI bugs that things get the trickiest. And so to just take that off the table was a wise decision, I think.
I'm still excited for Jetpack Compose though. We'll see how that does.
So I was going to throw out not so much that it doesn't do UI as that it doesn't force you to make some of these choices, which is like, without getting into particulars of the other, competing frameworks, which you just mentioned all of them, they are not designed necessarily to interop well with the existing platform. It is very difficult to create a solution that does play well with everything that exists there, which is kind of what Kotlin's design goal is, versus, I don't want to say it's easy because it's not easy to do any of these things, but it's easier to say we're just going to like not worry about the rest of what's out here and just build our own thing. And then the rest, the communication with the rest is sort of like at arm's length or at inter-process communication versus like direct interop, which is the thing. I can't say what we're doing exactly, but I've had to actually, I've gotten Compose, at least the runtime to run on native with help of folks who are way smarter with Compose than I am, but not the UI. I wouldn't expect that to come anytime soon, but eventually, sure.
And now kind of going to, the differentiation and the value proposition of KMM was pretty clear and aligned to your engineering philosophy. What was the evaluation part like, right? How did you introduce the concept to leadership? Was there any pushback? Just kind of walk us through that experience of like getting this ultimately from an idea that you agreed with philosophically to now where you're at and the success that you had with the technology.
It's like this is like where you sort of get into this like your mileage may vary situation, right? I think we kind of had this perfect storm of situation where like I think both of the apps kind of definitely had a lot of tech debt, like, or both platforms. One was straight up a hackathon project from the CEO. And so like we had kind of, I think, put off some of that tech debt. Founders of the company knew that like I was a huge fan of Kotlin. I've spoken at Kotlin Conf, and so I think that gave me some leverage or at least a little bit of a halo to be able to, to say some of these things. But, like one of the big things that I would sort of say is that, at the very least, like, what do you call a failed Kotlin multi-platform project? And it's a bog standard Android app, right? Like, yeah, okay, you try to go make Kotlin multi-platform work and you fail. Well, the Android app's still ready to go, and like you maybe have to rewrite the iOS side. So like there's this limited downside. I think, if I were being totally honest, like I think they were very impressed with Josh, and they knew that Josh really, like, that was what sort of sold him on this job in the first place, was that he got to do this.
That's true. That was a big
Yeah.
selling point for me.
Yeah, because I had been hounding Josh for a while, like, man, when are you gonna come work for me? So
you mentioned KMP, I was like, I'm there.
yeah. But yeah, so like we kind of had this thing where it was due for a rewrite. I think I had already kind of sold folks that, like, it's time to address the tech debt, file new project, which is the dream, right? Like, you very rarely get that opportunity. And this greenfield project that, the rest of it was just being able to convince them, like, well, look, here's how it does the Objective-C interop. And, basically at the end of it, like, I think my final sort of ripcord was like, if all this goes sideways, we can always call TouchLab. Soundbite for you there. It's like, yeah, we'll just call Kevin and it'll be fine.
Which is a perfect segue to my next question. Did you use any of our resources initially to kind of get acquainted with the tech, to implement it, anything like that?
CampKit. That was how it got started, because especially in those early days, I had no idea how to start a shared project. So that was invaluable to us. Stately, all the videos we found about the memory model were from TouchLabs. Those were the biggies.
So that pretty much covers it. CampKit, like, we would have never figured any of this out without CampKit, to be perfectly honest.
We're always glad to hear positive feedback about that.
I was also going to say it's great to hear. We, like you said, at that point, the initial setup was really difficult, and it can still be tricky, but the wizards and such are a lot better now. But at that point, it was definitely tricky, and that was our goal with CampKit, was to say, like, here's a starting point. Like, we're not necessarily, it's not everything you'll need, but it'll be something that you can jump off from.
My last question, personally for me, will be, what's the future of KMM at Volley? Any plans that you can share, things that you're looking into?
I don't know that there's, it's funny, like, Volley is growing enough that we, like, now have, for the first time, a PR firm that has, like, prepped us. It's like, don't say anything, you don't have to. So I don't think we have anything super interesting, like, to announce, but, like, obviously the more of our products that succeed and start to kind of, like, grow into these, like, mobile companion apps, like that, like, I will be hiring those roles. And, like, I remain a big fan of KMM and of Kotlin. And so I think, like Josh said, we're hoping that the things that we've built and learned and done over on Volley FM is going to make it really easy and fast to be able to replicate it and kind of create these very efficient, reusable patterns on our other apps.
And I'm also very hopeful about reusable components across our different apps. I think we've laid out a lot of great groundwork for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great place to kind of conclude. I want to thank you both for your time and for kind of sharing all the lessons and insights you've kind of picked up along the way. And it's really exciting to hear that the technology is so positively received at Volley, and we're excited to kind of see where maybe some of the work that you're doing on the open source front, how that matures and kind of takes off as well. So again, thank you for your time. And with that, thanks to the TouchLab team as well. And that'll conclude our TouchLab Share episode with Volley.